Hey, you've arrived at your second video for the day, 6-2 fractions and decimals. After you have the title and your name and date written, let's move on in 3, 2, 1. Alright, let's zoom in on this beautiful banana slug that I'm sure you did not know that you would learn about today. I want you to notice how it has this random little hole here that nobody knows why it's there, but maybe it breathes out of it, maybe it speaks out of it, maybe it's going to teach us math today, and maybe the mouth is going to move, I'm not sure. But let's read up here. How can you write equivalent fractions and decimals? Alright, I edited our sentence here to say a beautiful banana slug moves through forests in Northern California at a rate of about 1 divided by 20, 1/20th of an inch per minute. That is not much. Which decimal is equivalent to 1/20th? Let's see how small 1/20th of an inch is. That's small. That is super tiny, not even 1/10 of an inch, less than that. So, one way that we could do that is fractions can be written in equivalent forms. A fraction with a denominator of 10, 100, or 1,000, and so on, ending with 0, and in a factor of 10, can also be written as a decimal, and we love it when it's like this. So, one way you can do it is to change 1/20th to an equivalent fraction in 100ths. So we're thinking, what can I multiply 20 by so that the bottom is 100? And so we found out 20 times 5 is 100. But I know from previous lessons that if I multiply the bottom number by something, I also need to multiply the top by the same number so that it remains equivalent. So 1 times 5 is 5, 20 times 5 is 100. So an equivalent fraction to 1/20th is 5/100, and that's how we remain it equivalent. So 1/20th equals 5/100. How do we know to put the 5 here? Well, this is the 10th spot of decimals, and this is the 100th spot for a decimal. So I read it the same way, 5/100, 5/100. And there is another way you could do this. The other way that we could do this is to divide the numerator by the denominator with a secret word of exit sign. So let's look at this closer. 1 divided by 20 equals 1 divided by 20. We learned that in the previous lesson. You could write it this way. We also learned that 1 divided by 20, you put the 20 on the outside and the 1 on the inside with 2 zeros. I was trying to prep you for that. 20 cannot go into 1. 20 cannot divide into 10. But if there were 100 sheep, you could make 5 groups of 20. 20 times 5 is 100. Subtract, you get 0. We just made 1/20th into a decimal of 5/100 by dividing. You need to choose whether you would like to divide most of the time like this, or whether you like making an equivalent fraction by multiplying the top and the bottom so that the bottom number equals 100. So in our other way, you can use division to change any fraction to a decimal, any fraction at all. Let's move on. You do not have vocab notes today. So for example 1, I'm going to do 1 and 2, but you are not required to write anything in your notes about that. I see that they want a decimal and a fraction for the shaded area. First, I'm going to count how many there are. Alright, I counted these and I saw there was 100 and I labeled them. And now I'm going to see how many are shaded in. There are 1, 2 shaded in. Therefore, 2 shaded in out of 10 is a fraction, 2/10. I followed the direction for this. Now I need to follow the direction for decimal. What is 2/10 as a decimal? I would write that as 2/10 here with the 2 in the 10th spot. Moving on to number 2. I'm not actually a fan of counting how many squares there are, but I did count and I know there's 10 on the bottom. And let's count the side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I know there's also 10 here. Well, if I multiply 10 times 10, I get 100. I know there are 100 squares in this box. Now I'm going to see how many are shaded in. Well, we have 10, 20, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36 shaded in. First, let's make a fraction. Here is 36 shaded in out of 100. Now time to write a decimal. This is 36/100. 36/100. The 6 is in the 100th spot, so I read it 36/100. Alright, so the examples down here do need to be written in our notes. This is example 1 and 2. All right, let's use the first way to try to find an equivalent fraction here. I see 20 is the denominator again. I'm thinking, what can I multiply 20 by so that 100 is on the bottom so I can make it easily into a decimal? I know I can multiply 20 by 5. That's going to equal 100. Anything I multiply by the bottom, I'm also going to multiply by the top. I don't know 13 times 5 in my head, so I'm going to multiply that out. 5 times 3 is 15. 5 times 1 plus 1 is 6. 65 over 100. Now, they actually want it as a decimal. So, what is 65 hundredths as a decimal? Well, 65 hundredths with the 5 ending in a hundredths spot. Please write your work and the answer in your notes. Now let's go to the second example. This is read as 9 1,000ths. Well, because there's already a factor of 10 at the bottom, 1,000, I can already put that into a decimal. So I'm thinking, where do I put the 9 here? Which 0 do I put the 9? Well, this is tenths, hundredths, thousandths. I see it's thousandths, therefore the 9 will go here. And there is your answer. Moving on in 3, 2, 1. Here's example 2. All right, I'm going to do number 9 up here. You don't need to write it in your notes, but I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about putting this into simplest form. I'm looking at this picture and I'm thinking, how would I make that into a fraction? Well, I know there's 100 squares, and I know there are 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85 shaded in. Let's put that as a fraction. There are 85 shaded in out of 100, and now we want to put that into simplest form. Oh, thank goodness we've already gone over that in previous lessons. I'm asking myself, what can I divide 85 and 100 by? I see that 85 ends in 5. I see this ends in 0. I know that I can divide that by 5. 85 divided by 5 is 17, as I show the work right here. And I know that 100 divided by 5 is 20. Now I'm asking myself, can I divide 17 and 20 by any number? No, I cannot. That is called simplest form. Let's move on to the lower numbers. All right, I see for these numbers the directions say write each decimal, this is a decimal, as a fraction in simplest form. All right, so they want it similar to up here in simplest form. I'm glad we went over that before. And so by yourself, please try to make this into a fraction in simplest form. Now I'm going to show you the answers in 3, 2, 1. All right, for this one, it was 4 tenths. I wrote 4 tenths as a fraction. I asked myself, can I divide 4 and 10 by the same number? I can divide them both by 2 because they are even. Doing that, I got 2/5. This is a simplest form. Let's move on to the next one. I read this one as 6 hundredths because the 6 is in the hundredth spot. Therefore, this is 6 hundredths. I noticed that 6 and 100 are even. I could divide those by 2, getting 3/50ths. This is my simplest form, as 50 cannot be divided by 3. We're going to move on in 3, 2, 1. Here's independent or partners practice. Let's look at the directions. In these numbers, convert each fraction to a decimal. We're making these into a decimal. Remember, there are 2 ways that you could do that. Please choose the way that is easiest for the problem. The answers are coming in 3, 2, 1. For this first one, I was looking at the 8, and it's not really easy. You can't multiply 8 by anything to equal 100. So I went with the divide route, and here's my work for the division. I got 375 thousandths. Now showing the next one. So one way that you could have done this is realize that 2 times 5 is 10 at the bottom. We can make that easily into a decimal. So if you multiply the bottom by something, you also multiply the top. So I have 5 tenths, and as a decimal, that's 5 tenths. The other way you could have done that is just by division. Maybe you thought that was easier, and you would have gotten 5 tenths pretty quickly. Let's move on to the next one. Here are the 2 ways you could have done this. Making the 4 into 100 by multiplying the top and the bottom by 25, getting 25 hundredths, putting that into a decimal, or you could have divided just like this. Let's do the last one. And this one looks like it would be hard, but actually finding out that 15 times 4 is 60, my answer is 4 tenths. And I can't really think easily what I can multiply 15 by to equal 100 or 1,000, so I'd rather divide on this one. Moving on in 3, 2, 1. You've gotten to the end of our lessons today. Now please choose whether you would like to do one of these 3 options. Please choose one of them. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned a lot, and don't forget you are awesome.